Onikuma by Charles Gideon. Sarafutsu Center for Rest and Well-Being. Dumaring. Draconis Combine. 7th of September, 3145. Mamoru Uchida tugged at the bottom of his uniform jacket, pulling flat any wrinkles as he read his name tape once more. The surname appearing there was not his, and he silently hoped his commander never realized Mamoru had liberated the uniform from his locker. Brad would understand if he ever found out, but he would be honor-bound to report this, and command would not be as forgiving. "Chu-i, Giuliani?" the orderly asked without looking up from his clipboard. "You may see the patient now." Mamoru wordlessly fell into step behind the orderly as they began down a long, empty hallway with walls and floor of white tile. Metal doors broke up the walls every 3 meters on both sides of the hallway. Though he kept his eyes dutifully locked forward, Mamoru could see faces in several of the doors' windows. Some were curious, others wild-eyed, but mostly they were frightened. "Tell me," Mamoru said after quietly clearing his throat, "how has the patient been? Any change in his prognosis?" "No, sir," the orderly replied over his shoulder. "He's polite and cooperative so long as the attack doesn't come up. Poor man, he really got his mind scrambled out there. I assume that is why you are here? We haven't had any visitors for him in a few months." "Hi," he answered, keeping his voice stoic and respectful despite the guilt he felt in his gut. "Command is preparing to make a final determination in this case. I wish the notes from your doctors would suffice, but a final interview is mandatory. With that said, it will likely be only a formality." The orderly nodded as he stopped at one of the doors and began shuffling through the many keys that hung from the large ring attached to his belt. Mamoru rested a hand gently on the orderly's shoulder, leaning closer. "There may be matters discussed during this interview that are military secrets," he said in a low voice. "Don't worry about it." The orderly waved away his concern. "We have already disabled the camera in the room. We're well aware of interrogation protocols." Mamoru nodded appreciatively and stepped back. The orderly soon found the key and unlocked the door. With practiced ease, he pulled the door open and stepped inside. Mamoru counted to 3 and followed. He wanted to make sure the patient was oriented before making himself known. "Mr. Uchida, a Chu-i Giuliani is here for you, sir," the orderly said as Mamoru emerged through the doorway. Inside the room was a lacquered metal bed with a thin mattress, sparse blankets, and a utilitarian metal chair. The far wall was a large transparent panel overlooking rolling hills dotted with farms, and, in the distance, the Kurai Forest. The forest was famous for its mammoth trees, which grew to be several meters thick and dozens of meters tall. The breed which made up much of the forest grew so tightly together it was said you could spend days under the forest canopy without ever seeing the sun, which is how it had gotten its name. Beyond the dark looming forest, the mountains on the horizon were backlit in the oranges and violets of the planet's setting star. On the bed sat a middle-aged man. His frame was lean and looked as though it was used to carrying more muscle than it currently did. Streaks of gray showed at his temples, but the rest of his hair was thick and much longer than Mamoru had seen before. There was a brief flash of recognition in the man's eyes before he swiftly stifled it. "Ah, yes, Chu Giuliani. Please, come in and have a seat." The older man rose from the bed, gesturing to the chair. "Thank you," Mamoru replied with a slight bow before turning to the orderly. "Please, return to collect me in an hour. I will complete the interview by then." "Are you sure? I can stand outside the door, but if I leave, I will have to lock you in." "I am sure," Mamoru assured him as he easily stepped to the offered chair and sat down. He turned his gaze to the orderly, expectantly waiting for him to go. With a small bow, the orderly backed out through the door, closing it behind him. Mamoru and the patient silently locked eyes, waiting as they listened for the door to lock and the jingle of keys to retreat down the hall and out of earshot. "What do you think you are doing?" The elderly man broke the silence in a rushed whisper. "If they find you out, you'll be drummed out of the military." "I doubt they would have let me in here if I were wearing my own uniform, father, and I have important news to tell you." "Well then, be out with it, and on your way before anyone catches you," his father snapped. "In time. We have an hour. Can we start with how you have been? Do they treat you well here?" Mamoru offered. "Of course not." The elder Uchida snorted. The staff are kind enough, like the orderly who brought you here, but this is no place for a warrior. There is no opportunity for me to get exercise, and I have asked them to change my room several times, but they refuse. What is wrong with your room? Mamoru scanned the cold, sterile environment. Is there something different in the others? I want a room. Uchida glanced toward the window, hidden from the forest. Mamoru's shoulders slumped and he rubbed his face. So the reports were right. His father had always been shrewd and fearless, but now he was jittery over distant trees. It felt like this man he was with was a stranger. What happened to you, father? Okay. Mamoru took a deep breath and let it out in a long sigh. Tell me then, what happened out there? He asked as he gestured to the window and the dark woods that stretched on to the horizon. There's talk that Command is going to court-martial you to Haishi for insubordination because they think this is dereliction, though they can't prove it. When they're done with that, they're going to muster you out for being unfit for duty. No pension, no benefits. Think of Mother. What will she do? Mamoru barked before pausing and softening his tone. I apologize for not visiting, but the world has continued since you were admitted here. I'm here now, father, and I want... Mamoru stopped himself and looked down. I need to hear it from you, he finished as his eyes again locked with his father's. The elder Uchida gave Mamoru a long, measuring look, and after several moments, he nodded. Very well. I shall tell you, but know that you cannot unlearn what I am about to share. Hobuku Plains, Dumaring, Draconis Combine, 30th of October, 3144. We had been called out to investigate another livestock mutilation, which had become increasingly frequent over the previous several days. Steam rose in thin wisps from the carcass and into the late-night air as I stood around the large bovine body with my scout lance. Shujin Leonard finished her investigation of the corpse and stood upright. She rubbed her bleary eyes with a forearm and shrugged. Chu-i, I don't know what to make of it, she said as she pulled off her examination gloves. The organs are missing, but a lot of the meat is still there. It's like a backward field dressing. I really don't know why anyone would go to the trouble of killing a 3-ton animal and leave so much of it behind. We will have to see what Kashira Moritz has to say when he returns, I said while I took in the carnage one more time. The beast lay on its side. Its ribcage was exposed and splayed out toward me, and the 2 meters of ground between me and it were covered in thick red gore. I hope he's quick. We've never been to a mutilation scene so quickly, and I would like to get moving while the trail is still warm. We must catch whoever is doing this and put a stop to it before the farmers become any more terrified. They're already refusing to leave their homes at night. Leonard pointed past my shoulder with a lifted chin, and I turned to see Moritz running out of the darkness. What have you found, Kashira? I called to him. They definitely used a mech to carry the meat off, he replied when he arrived, catching his breath between words. The footprints continue that way for about 100 meters and disappear into the river, same as before. The rocky bottom makes it hard to know if it went up or downstream. Get this, though, he grinned. The tracks look like whoever these bandits are, they welded claws onto the mech's feet. Like we're supposed to believe it was a wild animal or something. The rest of the lance snickered at the joke. They would have good reason to mock us, I said, which cut off the jovial mood. They have been perpetrating these attacks for several weeks and get away with it every time. Moritz, you'll pair with me and we will cover downstream. You two will go upstream. Keep a sharp eye out for tracks leaving the river. We will patrol 50 clicks each direction at fastest safe speed. Radio the other pair if you see anything, but don't wait. We must chase this quarry to ground as quickly as possible. Everyone nodded their understanding, and we climbed into our mechs. My hitman and Moritz's Jenner made a good pair as we hurriedly traveled down each side of the riverbank. The ground was firm and easy to traverse, and I was confident we would be able to catch any mech that tried to use the wide river to cover their tracks. I continuously cycled through the imaging capabilities of my mech, making sure I wouldn't miss any clue of our target's passage, while my hitman's probe worked to make sure we didn't bypass a shutdown mech hiding in the river. Alpha 2, this is Alpha 1. I called as Moritz and I closed on the 50-kilometer mark. We haven't seen any sign here, and we are nearly finished with the sweep. What is your progress? Nothing so far, sir, Leonard replied. The banks get steep and muddy upstream, so it has slowed our progress, which would make it a poor escape route, I posited as I scanned through maps of the regions further downstream. Exactly my thought, Chu-i. It appears that from my current position, the river continues with Kurai Forest to the east and steep foothills to the west. Either would be an excellent place to hide a mech. If we angle in from here, we may be able to head off the bandits. Alphas 2 and 4, I am sending our coordinates to you. Make your way here. Alpha 3 and I will see what our active probes can pick up. Affirmative responses followed, and I switched to a private frequency for Moritz. I leave the foothills to you and your Jenner's jump jets. I'll take the forest. Hi, Chu-i, Moritz responded as he turned his mech away and started toward the foothills at a run. I cut across the last several clicks of open grassland at full speed, hoping to catch the enemy mech somewhere along the tree line. As I neared the edge of the forest, the immense size of the trees became apparent. Most trees on inhabited planets are roughly the same height as my hitman, but with some of those looming trees of Kurai Forest, I could have walked the mech under their lowest boughs without even rustling them. Active and passive sensors came up with nothing, so I brought my mech to a standstill. I activated my external microphones and listened. Over my own breathing in my Nero helmet, I could hear the creaks and groans of the trees in the night's gentle breeze. I sat listening for nearly a minute and was about to give up when I heard the crash of breaking tree limbs. My fingers worked my controls to isolate the sound band and increase the volume. After a few quiet seconds, there it was again, the sound of cracking trees, but without the expected heavy footfalls of a plodding mech. I brought in the sound band in case the audio equipment was filtering it out, but I heard nothing. I increased the volume, and still no sound. Not even the trees creaking. Increasing the volume further, I began to wonder if my equipment was malfunctioning now, or if it had been erroneous earlier when I'd heard snapping wood. At first it was faint. A deep rush of air, like someone working at a bellows the size of a building or a god working up a grand cough. As this noise repeated several times, it increased in volume each time until a sudden still fell across the forest. The following roar was so intense that it shot cold, shuddering spikes down my spine. I have seen combat on multiple occasions and have been well within the reach of death, but the feeling of dread that thundering growl filled me with was something else entirely. Looking back now, I can see why. That roar did not carry with it the threat of violence against a contemporary. It was a challenge from a predator to its prey. And in that moment, I knew I was the intended prey. It would be a lie if I denied my fear, or that it was my restraint harness that kept me upright in my command chair. But I did what any reasonable soldier of the dragon would do. I reminded myself there was no megafauna on Dumaring, and that this must be a scare tactic employed by the poachers to throw off pursuit. Alpha Lens, I said once I regained control of my breathing. I have strange audio pickups here. Nothing on sensors, though. I'm going to enter the forest to investigate. I will report in 10 minutes. Otherwise, come to this location. The lance confirmed receipts of the coordinates. I entered the tree line, trying to zero in on the source of the noise, which was a bit of guesswork because a mech's external microphones aren't exactly directional and the reverberations off the trees only confused things. Step by step, I moved further away from the rolling hills and deeper into the confines of the giant trees. Every moment took me further from the open sky and into the claustrophobic canopy. I was only 100 meters into the woods, and already any visible light from the stars had been replaced by deep shadows. The trees of Kurai have abnormally high levels of metals in their bark, making MagScan useless, so I relied on infrared to navigate. The thick trunks were even more disorienting in the green 2D haze displayed on my HUD, my own viewpoint, and I watched as they slowly drifted behind a far tree. I reset my active probe, needing it to confirm what I had just seen, but when it booted, it still showed nothing. With bated breath, I took a single step into the glade. The red lights reappeared, and this time IR did show what lay around them. What I had mistaken as floating lights were the glowing eyes of a beast I couldn't have imagined. The eyes blazed red with malevolence and a predatory intelligence. Their hatred crossed the open darkness, pierced my canopy, and bored into my pounding heart. I paused, and for the first time noticed the cold sweat running down my face as it approached. At the shorter range, I could make out what may have once been a Kodiak battle mech, but the uncannily flowing way it moved made it clear it was no longer a dead machine of myomer and metal. Its footfalls were light, and its arms swung limply from the shoulder with every weaving step it took. When it reached the center of the clearing, it planted its feet and squared with me. My brain was screaming at my fingers to activate the comms, but they refused to obey. Though my teeth chattered, I roused my courage. But just as my hand began to move toward the console, the thing opened the gaping maw where its cockpit should have been, and two long tongues of flame spurted out. The wail that accompanied them was deafening, and the trees around me visibly shook. In the light from those flames, I could see its patchy fur and the thick, goat-like horns sweeping back from the sides of its head. The moment lasted an eternity as my mind raced, trapped inside my numb body. Willing myself to action, I began to backpedal, but it pursued in a low, lopping run. I fumbled with my controls to bring the Hitman's arms up to unleash the lasers there, but the beast was too fast. It covered the space between us in a few bounds and caught the Hitman's arms in one of its massive clawed hands. I pulled the firing trigger in futile desperation, but the trio of beams wasted themselves into the ground between us. The creature wrenched my mech's arms forward and hewed it clean off at the elbow with a swipe from the other claw. I screamed into my cockpit and tried to continue my retreat, but backed up against a tree which stood resolutely against my passage. The Kodiak flung the detached arm to the side and twisted toward me. The glow in its eyes flashed bright, and I pressed myself into my command chair, fighting for any distance I could get from it. I watched as it crouched and leaped through the air at me. Its massive claws slammed into my Hitman's shoulders. My limbs flailed around the cockpit as the tree behind me exploded into shards under the impact. There was a moment of weightlessness as my mech fell to its back, and then darkness. I am not sure if I lost consciousness or not, but my entire body groaned with stiff pain as I opened my eyes. There, outside my canopy, the monster leaned close, and I knew it could see me through the reflective ferroglass. Not just me, but its eyes stripped away everything I believed was me and left me a trembling failure. I laid there, gasping for air in my Nero helmet, too afraid to move. The hunter shifted and opened its maw. Again came the tongues of flame. This time they danced around my view screen, like it was getting a taste before taking a bite. In the glow of the flames, its visage exuded rage, hunger, and a bestial pleasure. At least, that is, the parts of its face which caught the light, because at the base of the flames, where the light should have been most intense, was simply nothing. I have traveled on many dropships and peered into the depths of space countless times, but where the enemy pilot should have been was a hole far emptier than the deepest recesses of space. Something about that hollow darkness called to me, calmed my fears, beckoned me home. I knew I would find peace within it, and welcomed its coming. The Kodiak reared back, and as it did, I lost sight of its dark pit of a mouth. In that moment, my body reacted automatically, slamming the ejection control. Explosive bolts blasted in rapid succession, and my ejection chair blasted me away from my hitman on roaring rockets. I skipped off the ground once, that I remember. I awoke in my command chair, wedged against the base of a tree. The evening chill gnawed numbly at my bare skin. I pulled off my Nero helmet and took in a deep lungful of air. Blood ran down my face, and I wiped it away before it got into my eyes. The sound of grating metal surrounded me, but I could not tell if it had just begun, or if I had just become aware of it. Everything rushed back in a moment, and my jaw trembled despite the pain. I didn't want to look, but I had to see. It took several long seconds for me to find the nerve to look beyond my chair, and I fought down bile as I rolled to my side to get a vantage point. The Kodiak was still there, but it had apparently lost interest in me. In the faint glow of its burning tongues, I could see my hitman was still on its back. Its torso armor had been ripped away, splayed up toward the dark canopy of trees above. The fiend was squatted next to it, casually ripping fistfuls of engine and gyro from my crippled mech with its claws before devouring it piece by piece. Sarafutsu Center for Rest and Well-Being, Dumaring, Draconis Combine, 7th of September, 3145. Father! The shout startled the elder Uchida from his story, and he stared wide-eyed at his son. Just as he had forgot his son was present while recounting the story, he now forgot what he had been saying. Mamoru wordlessly rose from his chair and walked to the corner of the room. His shoulders heaved as he took a breath and tried to release the frustration and grief into the air. "Do you even hear yourself?" he demanded as he spun back to his father. Despair and disgust dripped from his voice. "A monster mech ate yours? How can you say such a thing with a straight face?" "I can say it because it is the truth, or is honesty no longer a valued trait?" Uchida asked as Mamoru rubbed his face with both hands and fought his emotions down. "No, it is not that. I did not come here to question your honor," he said as he crossed back to the chair and carefully sat. Seeing his father now as a small, disgraced, and self-doubting man, Mamoru collected himself. "I'm sure there is an explanation for this. I will help you find it, and we can explain everything to command. There are reports coming from the Rosalhog Dominion that they have a new medium-class mech design, one with stealth capabilities and claws for battle." He tried to keep the hope in his voice from becoming blatant. "That has to be what you encountered, Father." "Medium class, you say?" Uchida said with a shake of his head. "What I saw was easily twice the size of my own mech. Besides, I never heard tell of such a design. Did it even exist at the time I was attacked?" "Not according to the reports." Mamoru slumped in the chair, defeat written across his face. He thought for a moment and sat back up. "But the tongues of flame you describe could have been a flamer retrofit, performed by some bandits who came across salvage from the Dominion War." "I know what a blast from a flamer looks like," he replied flatly. "You said you did not come to question my honor, but I am feeling as though instead you are questioning my intelligence." "I'm sorry." Mamoru threw his hands up in hopelessness. "But this doesn't make sense. I don't know what to say. How do you even make sense of this to yourself?" "There is a tale as old as Terra itself," Uchida began, absent-mindedly tugging at the collar of his patient uniform. "It is said that when a bear lives too long on its own in the mountains, it goes through a metamorphosis. In the right conditions, it will grow to become a fierce being, no longer an animal, but not a demon either." He glanced to the window before continuing in a hushed tone. "They called such a thing an Onikuma." "A demon bear?" Mamoru half rose out of his chair in disbelief. "You want me to believe some ancient myth caused a mech to become a sentient being that haunts the forest? Come on, Father, give me something I can work with." He dropped back into his chair. "I'm trying to save you." Uchida gave him a single, understanding nod and rose from his bed. He kneeled at the side of it and tipped a corner off the ground. After a glance at the door, he removed the rubber foot from the tubular metal and withdrew something from the interior of the leg. He quietly lowered the bed back to the floor before he rose and silently walked to Mamoru, grimly peering down on his seated son. "You asked how I explain it," he said as he revealed the object tucked against his uniform. "I now ask you, Mamoru, to explain this." Mamoru sat dumbfounded as he struggled to understand what his father held. It was about the same thickness as his little finger at one end and came to a fine point on the other. The color was so dark brown it was nearly black, though the light showed hints of blue. The flexible cylinder was nearly the length of his forearm. He hesitantly reached out a hand and took it. It was smooth to the touch and quite light for its size. "I do not understand. What am I holding?" "I retrieved this from a jagged piece of armor on my hitman after my lance's approach scared off the bear. This is a strand of its hair. I have smuggled it with me since that day as proof of what I saw. So please explain it." "This," Mamoru began, but was cut off by the sound of keys jingling down the hallway. With a quick glance at his chronometer, he realized the time. "The hour is up," he said with a sudden panic. He pushed the strand back into his father's hand. "Take this and put it away." He stood and moved to the door, blocking the small window as his father returned the item to his bed frame. The sound of keys became footsteps which stopped outside the door. The lock of the door quietly disengaged, and the door swung out. The same orderly as before looked at Mamoru disinterestedly. "The requested hour is over, sir. Do you require more time?" "No," Mamoru shook his head, looking at his father. The pain in his eyes was hidden from the orderly, but had a visible effect on Uchida. "No, I think there is nothing more for me here. I have no other questions." He turned to leave. "I have a question for you, Chu-i Giuliani," Uchida said, stopping Mamoru and the orderly in the doorway. "Why this inquiry now? I've given this information before. It's all the same as my first report. Why come for an in-person interview?" "As I told you, Chu-i Uchida, this is the final step before Command makes their determination about your ability to return to service. You and I both know one interview isn't going to change their minds. Why come here for this?" "Wait, you said you needed to hear it from me," Uchida said. Mamoru could not bring himself to look his father in the eye, and again moved toward the door. Understanding shone bright in Ukida's eyes as he realized the true reason for the visit. Then, just as quickly, the color drained from the elder's face, and his eyes went wide and glazed. "No, no, no! This isn't about me or Command, is it? The mutilations have begun again, haven't they?" He started towards Mamoru, but was intercepted by the orderly. "That's it, isn't it? The mutilations have restarted. The Onikuma has come down from the mountains." "Sir," the orderly said through gritted teeth over his shoulder as he restrained Uchida, "you're going to have to see yourself out. I told you he gets this way." Mamoru backed slowly out of the room. His gaze was locked on his father and the desperate horror in his eyes. He stood dejectedly, looking into the room for a long moment before ripping his attention away. Moving quickly down the hall, he was chased by the shouts of his father as another orderly and a nurse rushed into his father's room. "Don't go!" Uchida screamed. "Dragon be damned! Go AWOL! Relinquish your post! Whatever you do, don't go into the forest!" The door was mercifully closed, insulating Mamoru from his father's frantic screams. With a sharp shake of his head, he cleared his mind before shuffling away, the cries having sapped all his energy. Mamoru was in a daze as he walked to his car. After sliding into the driver's seat, tears began rolling down his cheeks from seeing his father in such a state. But could a madman have been able to deduce the real reason for my visit? Does that prove he's sane? It was too much to take in, and Mamoru began to weep in a way he hadn't since he was a small child. Minutes went by, but suddenly he had a sense someone was watching him. He quickly wiped his face and composed himself. It would do no good to get caught now. Glancing around, he saw no other cars in the parking lot, and no one was looking out from the windows of the facility. He took a deep breath and tried to focus. But the feeling was still there, nagging at the back of his mind. He decided it best to ignore it and reached up to adjust the rearview mirror. In the mirror, he could barely make out the rolling hills behind him in the pale twilight. Beyond the hills, against the dark shadow of the foothills, stood the darker shadow of the Kurai Forest. With a shudder, Mamoru realized where he was being watched from, and he was overtaken by the dreadful feeling that he would meet his watcher all too soon.